We all remember the images. It was seen as a revolution that captured the hearts and minds of the world. A revolution led by Sudanese women, the Kandakas, a colloquial term for Nubian queens. What began in Akbara in northern Sudan would lead to the toppling of one of Africa's longest serving dictators. Many had hoped that following the fall of Omar al-Bashir, out of the ashes would develop a new Sudan. Yet for many, the economic crisis that plagued the final years of Bashir's reign has only worsened.
بنعاني من المواصلات وبنعاني من المعيشة ومن العيش يعني تعبانين شديد.
They increase the fuel for us unfairly and uneconomically and scientifically. These people just doing nothing. Sudan have a lot of scholars in economy. You see, they are following whatever it is, the World Bank, recipe, whatever. It doesn't fit us.
And the police state associated with the dictatorship seems to be live and kicking.
في تغيير بسيط في الحريات لكن basically ما في حاجة تغيرت كثيرة.
Poor people don't have that. They really are suffering the most, and they're the ones that actually ignited the revolution.
2 years on, some are beginning to ask if life is really any better.
ما نجحت.
I went to Sudan, the country that birthed my parents, to find out more. Bashir came to power in a military coup in 1989 when I was 7 months old. At 31, this was my first time visiting Sudan and he was not the president. In fact, he was now sitting in Koba prison, the very facility that his military forces had previously detained my father. I didn't know what to expect, but one thing that caught my attention straight away was just how bad the economy had got. Inflation had reached 220% and the country was saddled by 60 billion in external debt. So we're on our way to Souk Underman, the oldest market in Sudan, to speak to the locals.
الشغل يعني لو كانت المواصلات متوفرة الساعة بيجيبك، لكن هسه المواصلات بقت معاناة شديدة. أكبر مشكلة شايفاها حصلت بعد الثورة هي المواصلات. المواصلات والعيش يعني حاجات كثيرة.
شهر 7 لشهر 8 وشهر 9 الدولار كان عامل 80. بعد كده الدولار هسه شهر 11 عامل 230. الوضع يعني في البلد دي تعبان شديد. هسه احنا زمان يعني في اليوم واحد بيبيع 5 قطع 6 قطع 7 قطع، هسه احنا قطعة واحدة ما نقدر نبيعها في اليوم، هسه 6 يوم ما بيعنا والله.
Yet it wasn't just working class traders and shoppers in the Sudanese markets that were feeling the brunt of the economic crisis. Everyone was struggling, including members of my own family. I went to speak to my uncle, Dr. Mohammed Al Khalifa Ahmed, a consultant dentist at High Al Safia Hospital.
غير متوفرة، مواد كثيرة. حاجة اسمها كوريجا دي بنسبب بها الطاقم ما لاقيناها في السودان. عرفتها؟ في حاجات كثيرة جدا ما متوفرة. الأدوية، في أدوية أنا بفتش 3 يوم عشان ألقاها ما بلقاها. ما في. حتى الشركات اللي بتنتج هنا وقفت التصنيع للتزعير، ما بتخارج معهم بسعر الدولار اللي كل يوم زايد، لأنه لو مشوا عيادات خاصة الأسعار غالية جدا. يعني مثلا احنا بنعمل الطقم هنا ب20,000، في برا ب120,000. يعني بيجوا هنا عشان الأسعار، بيقعدوا من الصباح ينتظروا لأنه أسعار أقل. لكن عموما الأدوية ما متوفرة والمواد ما متوفرة. عندنا مشاكل في الجلافز، عندنا مشاكل في الماسك، عندنا مشاكل كثيرة ولو صار الوضع كده ممكن نقيف من الشغل.
The frustration was palpable in the street, and as I drove around Khartoum and Underman, the traffic would suddenly stop because of protests over the economic situation, and I soon became accustomed to the sight of tyres burning. Yet as we drove, the things most noticeable was the long queues.
Nothing symbolises the economic crisis in Sudan as much as these gas queues. It goes all the way back and around the corner, and people wait for days just to fill up their tank. Some people even pay people to wait by their cars, and it's a crisis that doesn't seem to be ending anytime soon.
However, this wasn't the whole story, and as the older generation in Sudan say, Mecca wasn't built in a day. And although the economy was struggling, things were changing. One of the biggest changes was people felt free to express themselves in a way they hadn't felt before.
قلت لك الرسومات دي الشباب القوم الثورة عكسوا الحاجات اللي هم دايرينها في شكل فنون عشان حتى الزود اللي ما بيعرف عربي ما يعرف شنو ده بالرسم يصلي وتصل المعلومة.
One of the most noticeable things about this trip to Sudan was the artistic murals. They seemed to be everywhere, even in places I least expected them.
There's something poetic that this wall that commemorates the revolution and the martyrs is here opposite Khartoum's biggest police club, where officers who brutalised protesters would come to relax after their shift was over. The wall has been painted over several times by security forces, yet it reappears, demonstrating that the resistance and what it represents cannot be erased.
Sudania, mia
I visited Capital Radio 91.6 FM, Sudan's first English radio station, and a creative hub for musicians and artists in Khartoum. I sat down with two members of the Sudanese hip-hop group The Circle to get a better understanding of how things have changed for Sudanese artists.
During the time, with like the revolution and everything happening, I feel like expression became more free. Like more people began to like express freely and openly, and it wasn't looked down upon, like Proof was saying. And I feel like as well the art itself was influenced by the revolution and the topics like surrounding the revolution and what felt like needed to be changed.
When we did the show on December 26th last year, we did a show with just a crazy lineup of Sudanese artists. Laida, Rotation, Tudo, Bass was the headliner, Flipter, was all the Circle, there was a bunch of other people, Samani, and basically during that show, I was also hosting it, and it was at Friendship Hall. So for those that are familiar with Friendship Hall, you know, that was kind of like synonymous with al-Bashir. And on stage, there was 3,000 people there, and I asked them to repeat a certain profanity dedicated to Omar al-Bashir, and all 3,000 people made a gesture with their hand to let him know how they felt.
Wow.
It was not this gesture. And that was like, wow, if this was last year, we would all get shot up.
Yeah.
Or a couple months before, like we would not be able to do that. We would not be able to all insult the president in Sudan, in Friendship Hall.
Facts. Like literally somebody had came up to us and was like just 1 year before that, like exactly, there was like a speech where the president at the time, Bashir, was like pretty much setting up a curfew for people to like, nobody could go out past 10 p.m. You know what I mean? And so like this girl came up to us and was like, yo, like this, there was a curfew at this time last year, like now you guys are on stage saying this, like, and everyone's saying it, and like that's crazy. And that to us was like really like that was a testament, like it's a blessing to even be a part of anything that can make a difference. But like it was a testament to how things have changed. As for what you were saying about like saying these things about the Hamitis and the Burhans of the country, I think we should be saying those things even louder about those guys.
But people are actually.
Yeah, and that's the good thing, because like, you know, with them, they completely denied any form of like
wrongdoing.
Yeah, they denied the wrongdoings, and they also denied like any form of like they would like laugh at, they would snicker at like Madaniya, which is like, you know, like a civilian, like a citizen-led government. You know, they'd laugh at it. They literally mock that idea.
General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan and General Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, known as Hemeti, are significant actors in how Sudan's revolution played out. Soon after the revolution, both generals quickly became the most powerful men in the country. To understand why and how, it's important to reflect on the demise of Bashir and the subsequent events that followed. It was universally recognised that it was the mass mobilisation of the people of all ages and tribes and ethnicities, and the culmination of protests throughout the country that signalled the end for Bashir. However, it was the military, under the pretext of siding with the revolutionaries, who staged the coup and ultimately ousted Bashir and installed themselves as a transitional military council, the TMZ. Yet because of Sudan's long history of popular revolutions being hijacked by the military, many on the streets were skeptical of the TMC's intentions.
حصل من امبارح ده خطير جدا مؤشر ما تمام نهائي ان احنا ما بنثق في المجلس العسكري بيجمع الشعب القاعد هنا ده كله انه برهان وسخان جابوا الكيزان وحميتي ذاته طمعان حميتي طمعان نحن دايرين نوجه رساله لحميتي من هنا حميتي مفتكر انه الشباب دي بتخاف منه عنده فهم في راسه انه الناس دي بتخاف منه حميتي طمعان جابوا الكيزان وبرهان وسخان والمجلس كله وسخان.
Hence when Bashir resigned, the demonstrators simply escalated their protests and continued their around-the-clock sit-in occupation of the military HQ, demanding the fall of the entire regime, including the TMC.
هذه ثورة مضادة تقوم بها فلول النظام السابق لاستعادة نفسها من جديد لكي يهربوا من العدالة الانتقالية. نحن بنقول للمجلس العسكري رسالتنا واضحة إنه الشباب ده ما حيرجعوا لأي سبب من الأسباب. نحن مستعدين نموت. ليه؟ لأنه دي رسالة بتاعت أجيال سابقة. نحن دايرين نبني دولة جديدة.
Bashir's former vice president, Awad ibn Auf, was the first to announce that he would head Sudan's transitional military council, leading to an eruption of anger from protesters that led to Ibn Auf stepping down within 24 hours.
وعليه أعلن أنا وزير الدفاع رئيس اللجنة الأمنية العليا اقتلاع ذلك النظام والتحفظ على رأسه بعد اعتقاله في مكان آمن.
But not before he named his successor, General al-Bashir, who served as one of Bashir's top military generals. When the army turned on their former boss and asked him to step down, it was allegedly Burhan who delivered the message in person. Burhan sat as the head of the Sovereign Council and appointed a suspected warlord, Hemeti, as his deputy, who led the Rapid Support Forces originally known as Janjaweed, an Arab ethno-nationalist militia who had earned notoriety for alleged war crimes and scorched earth policy in Sudan's Darfur region. The TMC insisted on a power-sharing agreement, where the military held on to the major levers of power, while the protest movement wanted a full civilian-led government. Eventually, the negotiations broke down and the TMC began to criminalise the protests and declared the sit-in as a security threat. Then, the unthinkable happened.
It was right here on June the 3rd, 2019, during the holy month of Ramadan, in the early hours of the morning, while many peaceful protesters at the sit-in were still asleep, the armed men in the uniform of the Rapid Support Forces opened fire, killing around 127 and injuring at least 700 more.
Eyewitness accounts said the armed forces burnt tents with people still in them and fired live bullets at those that did not disperse from the protest site quick enough. Witnesses there that day say at least 40 bodies were tied with rocks and dumped in the nearby River Nile.
النيل مضروب رصاصة وفي الوقع في النيل هو أصلاً وقع كده عيتر وقع الدردق وقع في النيل وفي الربطوهم كده تربطوا عديد كده رموهم في النيل.
Data compiled by the Central Committee of Doctors showed hospitals in Khartoum had recorded more than 70 cases of rape in the attack and its immediate aftermath. The true number was likely to be much higher because of the social stigma in Sudanese society around reporting sexual assaults. We spoke to Amal, who was one of the protesters there that day.
بداية من زي الساعة 5 و10 تقريبا بدأ صوت الرصاص في شارع النيل وجزء من الشباب مشوا هناك. في الوقت داك احنا كنا في الخيمة بتاعتنا، واحد من الأولاد ساكنين وداني قدام البحرية، فالمنظر كان حاجة غريبة جدا، يعني كمية من الناس نازلة شايلين عصي وبيضربوا بومبان، وفي احنا من المنطقة أو من قدام البحرية ما كنا شايفين ورا القضيب بتاع القطر بيحصل شنو، كنا شايفين في دخان اللي هو الوقت ده كان بده يحرقوا في الخيام، والناس بتموت، ناس بتضرب، يعني حتى الضرب ما في الرجلين مثلا ولا في اليد عشان انت تجري، لا، واحد بيكون مضروب في راسه وواحد بيكون مضروب في، يعني كانت حاجة تجربة والله تجربة هي very enlightened في الآخر. يعني أنت بتمر بإنك تكون في لحظة بتاعت موت، في موت كتير قدامك، وأنت ما عارف أنت حتموت ولا لا، لأنه شايف الموت قدامك. الحصل إنه يعني إحنا قدرنا طلعنا في الآخر، لكن كانت ضربتها، اتكسرت يدي هنا واتكسرت دي هنا. الضرب كان جامد يعني، وحتى الناس بعد ما هي مضروبة لا لسه بيضربوكم زيادة، وما عاوزين الإسعاف يجي ياخد الناس. يعني إحنا ما هننسى الحاجة.
Communications throughout the country was shut down, as were the internet, resulting in a near total blackout in the immediate aftermath of the massacre, and a lockdown was imposed with a brutal crackdown on anyone leaving their homes. The majority of people held Hemeti and the rapid support forces responsible for the killings. Hemeti himself denied the charge, complaining that it was imposters wearing rapid support forces uniform that carried out the massacre, as well as the subsequent crackdown in Khartoum.
وفي دكاكين كان في تصورت أن الناس يجدوا في الدعم السريع، الحين اليوم الناس تفهم أن الكاتب بتاع الدعم السريع ده ما في.
Senior members of the military council refused to participate in this documentary, despite various invitations. However, I did manage to speak with ex-Lieutenant Colonel Omar al-Bab, who was dismissed from his position for social media posts that were seen to be too supportive of the protesters. As a trained military man, I wanted to know his perspective about who was responsible for the June 3rd massacre.
في تقديري مجزرة فض الاعتصام هي مسؤولية المجلس العسكري الانتقالي، هو المتهم والمسؤول الأول عنها بكثير من الشواهد والقرائن التي لا مجال لذكرها الآن، ولكن بما لا يدع مجال للشك أنه هو المسؤول الأول المتهم عن هذه المجزرة، مهما كانت الأقاويل الأخرى، مهما كانت الدفوعات، مهما كانت المبررات. وهي السبب الرئيسي في هذا الشرخ الآن بين الشارع وبين الجيش. الآن الشارع يلوم الجيش لأن الأمل كان كبيرا من أجل الحماية. الآن لا أحد من الشارع السوداني يلوم الدعم السريع، بالرغم من مشاركة أفراده بصورة واضحة في عملية فض الاعتصام وفي ارتكاب المجزرة، ولكن لأن الشعور الرابط الوجداني ما بين الشعب وما بين الجيش هو الذي يجعله يلقي باللوم عليه.
The violence derailed already tense negotiation between protest leaders and the generals and plunged Khartoum and much of the rest of Sudan into a state of grief and seething with anger. Negotiations eventually resumed a month later, thanks to foreign diplomatic efforts and mediation by the African Union and Ethiopia, and a mass mobilization by protesters on the 30th of June, less than a month after the killings. On the 17th of August 2019, a power sharing agreement was signed by Hemeti and Bohan, who represented the military council, and Ahmed al-Rabib from the Forces for Freedom and Change, the umbrella coalition representing the pro-democracy protesters. Despite Sudanese women representing around 60% of the protest movement, and the international icon of the revolution, Ala Salah, being a woman, when the negotiations with the military restarted, there was only a single woman representative, Mother Hamed An-Nil. I spoke to her and asked her why the Forces for Freedom and Change, accepted a power sharing agreement with the military after such horrific massacre on June the 3rd, 2019.
احتمال من أوائل من أهم التحديات اللي واجهت الثورة السودانية إنه كان في إضرار للتفاوض مع مجلس عسكري هو استلم الحكم بعد سقوط البشير ومجلسه أو الحكومة اللي معاه. فده خلى إنه يكون في مشكلة في الانتقال نفسه، إنه في عساكر عاوزين يكونوا جزء من السلطة. العساكر ديل بيحظوا بدعم إقليمي من دول المحاور تحديدا دول الخليج، فده أثر برضو على الانتقال وعلى التفاوض وعلى القوة بتاعت أو على موازين القوة في الأرض. فعن طريق التأثير في موازين القوة دي الناس وصلت لاتفاق بتاع باور بالانس اجريمنت، يعني هو اتفاق بتاع توازن قوى أكثر من إنه هو إكمال للثورة أو ده الطريق الطبيعي المفروض تواصل به الثورة للآخر. الحاجة دي يعني خلقت تأثير حقيقي، خلقت مشكلة حقيقية في الانتقال، إنه نحن عندنا مكون مدني ومكون عسكري.
Faisal Mohammed Salah, the Minister of Information and Culture and a spokesman for the transitional government, sat down with me and gave me his thoughts on the complicated power sharing agreement that he was now part of.
And it's a process, the transitional period is a process, and at the end of the process, the hope and the aim is for democratically elected government.
Yes.
But what's to say the army doesn't do the same thing again, and they once again try to share power with a democratically elected government?
I think that will depend on the balance of power, because we had this what we call constitutional declaration, and the constitutional declarations put an end to the military participation by the end of the transitional period, where we should finish the constitution, the new constitution, and we are going to have an election, and of course a new democratic government will take control. And the army will go back to the barracks, will be just doing what the army in the other countries do. This is what the constitutional declaration and the political agreement agreed upon. And I think everything depends on this balance of power, because if the civilians are weak, then maybe the army will have new ideas. But day after day, there is a progress on that.
Who do you think really runs the show here in Sudan?
The military.
Definitely the military, and it's definitely not Hamdok. I feel like Hamdok is a puppet. Like, it's definitely people behind him that are running things. He's basically...
I'm pretty sure
he's the preface of everything. He's the preface. He's the one that, like, the sweet talks that makes everyone feel like calm, like everything's okay, everything is gonna get better. But that's not how it's like. They should tell us the truth as it is, you know? Like, things are not getting better, like, don't lie to us.
From a personal perspective, it was difficult to see how things have played out. So many friends and family members had such high hopes and expectations of what Sudan's revolution would achieve and how their lives would improve. But as often is the case, things haven't quite gone to plan.
Sudan has faced many challenges and obstacles since the protest that removed Omar al-Bashir began. For many, life has got harder, and the question of democracy still has not been answered. Yet for the families and friends of those who gave their lives for a future they will not be part of, failure is not an option. For them, the revolution is simply unfinished.
והפעם נורמליזציה בין ישראל לסודן.
In part 2, we look at how foreign powers have been instrumental in shaping Sudan's transitional process. We ask how Sudan's revolution, with all its hope and promise, has led to the controversial decision to normalise relations with Israel. We also look at the role of women in Sudan's protest movement and ask if their marginalisation is indicative of how the grassroots are no longer calling the shots in Sudan's unfinished revolution.